The janitor's mop slipped before anyone laughed. Water spread under the mayor's shoes, and for a moment, shame was louder than the jukebox. Thanksgiving week made the diner busier, councilmen in pressed shirts, locals in denim crowding every booth. It was here, of all places, that Walter Ashe stood at the far corner, mop in hand, trying to do his job in the in-between space where civic pride and small-town chores collided. The chair legs scraped the clatter louder than usual, because Elliot Raines wanted it to be. He was younger, dressed in a crisp shirt with his town-issued badge clipped high. He tapped the microphone of the portable PA the council had borrowed from the library hall. "Folks, this is exactly why we need a systems overhaul. Still running 2019 firmware, if you can believe it." He cut his glance toward Walter and relying on janitors to keep the place tidy when we should be thinking bigger. A ripple of laughter rolled across the room. Someone coughed into their coffee. Walter, quiet as ever, shifted his mop, but the handle caught against the leg of a table. The mop head dropped with a wet slap water spreading like a thin halo on the tile. Hook, 30s mop slips. There was a pause just long enough for the insult to land. Elliot raised his brows, milking the silence. "Well, I guess that's one way to polish the floor." The crowd chuckled. Humiliation had texture. You could feel it settle like dust clinging to the man at the center of it. Walter bent slowly, folding the mop head back with deliberate calm. His hands did not tremble. He simply wrung out the strands and leaned the mop carefully against the wall, as though to say, "This mess isn't worth a rush." Silent beat. Mary Cole, who ran the post office, sipped her coffee. She noticed because she always did the corner of Walter's jacket lifting as he crouched. A rectangular patch, frayed, faded, but stitched with pride, peeked out on the inside lining. She squinted, but said nothing. Motif tease, patch, glimpse. Moving on, Elliot said, satisfied, turning back to his prepared speech. He pointed at the chart on the wall lines and bars, showing how outdated the town's systems were. He talked big words, efficiency, modernization, outside contractors. But the attention of half the room had shifted not toward his chart, but toward Walter, who had straightened with the same composure he always carried. "Does the floor need?" someone began, but Elliot cut them off with a laugh. "I think we're fine. Our janitors got it handled." His tone laced the word with dismissal. "Outrage, justice marker." Walter's eyes lowered to the mop handle, his breath steady. He did not speak. The diner door opened, cold November air sneaking in. Pastor Leroy stepped in, greeted by nods. He tapped Walter's shoulder lightly, in passing an acknowledgement without words, before taking his seat near the back. Walter folded the damp rag into the bucket and sat on the edge of a chair in the corner, close enough to keep working, but far enough not to intrude. The meeting swelled again, with Elliot's voice, every sentence a nudge, every point a slight. The townsfolk leaned in, nodding politely, though a few pairs of eyes wandered toward Walter's quiet figure. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elliot said, "we can't run a modern town on systems from another decade. When the library's network hiccups, what do? Call in outside consultants. When the files back up, who has to carry the weight? Me. And I don't think anyone here wants that responsibility on a janitor's shoulders." This time the chuckles were thinner. Walter rested his hands together, thumbs pressed lightly against one another. A habit, a centering motion. The room's hum receded in his mind. Then, without warning, the fluorescent lights flickered. A low alarm tone sounded from the borrowed projector connected to the library's network. The graph Elliot had been showing sputtered into static. What Elliot blinked, tapping the laptop. That's not the static spread, red lines of code spilling across the screen like veins. Someone gasped. "Is that—" "Probably just a glitch," Elliot said, quickly slamming a key. Nothing changed. The screen beeped, and an automated voice spilled from the speaker system. Integrity compromised. Protocol check engaged. A hush fell over the diner. Mugs froze halfway to lips. Chairs stopped mid-creak. Elliot's jaw tightened. It's just ignore it. Technical hiccup. We'll resume. But the beeping escalated, insistent pulsing through the space like a heartbeat that was too fast. Walter lifted his head, calm gray eyes resting on the flickering screen. No panic. No surprise. Just steady observation. The library at night hummed differently, vent fans like a steady breath rain pattering on the windows, fluorescent tubes holding their soft wine. Walter Ash moved through the stacks and slipped into the narrow server room. He set down his thermos, pulled up the diagnostics, and watched the first lines of code climb the screen. From his sleeve, the frayed patch peeked out again. The stitched letters had faded. You could sense a motto there, but it was unreadable, like a hymn half forgotten. A shuffle in the doorway. Mr. Ash. Jamie stood with his backpack slung loose. You need a hex key for that banner, Walter said, eyes on the monitor. Jamie stepped closer. I saw what happened earlier. At the diner. Spills happen. Walter's tone was even. The boy's gaze fell on the patch. What does it say? Walter's thumb brushed the thread. Old words that still hold. Jamie hesitated. Dad said you're meddling with machines. Walter looked at the scrolling log. Machines break. People misunderstand. Both can be corrected. The server fans lifted a note. Amber lights blinking. Jamie leaned in. Is that normal? Depends which part you're watching. His phone buzzed. Jamie checked the text. Dad says, tell the janitor not to touch anything. Walter gave a small, steady smile. Tell him I'm cataloging. Touch comes later. Jamie frowned. He says you'll make it worse. The surest way to make it worse, Walter said gently, is to make it loud. The rain rattled harder, and the thrift store radio on the shelf caught a bar of fiddle before sliding back into static. Walter rubbed the patch again, a silent motion of grounding. A second amber light blinked, then another. On the screen, a message flashed, checksum variance detected. Jamie swallowed. Is that bad? It's honest, Walter replied. From the hallway, Elliot's voice leaked under the door. If he touches a single config file, I'll have his keys. Walter didn't move. Policy has its way, he murmured. Sometimes it slams a door with paperwork. SM lock plus slams equal appluk quiche hongfai handong bauluk. Jamie hovered by the desk. So what do? We do this in sequence, Walter said. Quiet steps. You hold the light when I ask. The screen shuddered error text, multiplying like cracks in glass, node handshake, failing cascade imminent. Jamie froze. Walter's face remained calm, eyes fixed on the screen. His thumb pressed once more into the faded patch, as the fans whined higher, the cursor blinking like a pulse about to skip. The town council room above the library smelled of old varnish and damp coats. Rain tapped the tall windows with patient fingers, and the heater rattled as if it resented the overtime. Folding chairs lined both sides of a long table where the council leaned in murmurs riding just above the storm. Walter Ash sat in the back away from the fire of attention, his jacket folded neatly on the chair beside him. The frayed patch peaked just enough that a pair of eyes here and there caught sight of it. The letters on its lower edge, barely visible, hinted at something like silent service. No one asked aloud. Not yet. Elliot Raines cleared his throat, papers shuffled for emphasis. We need outside expertise. Real IT, not janitorial improvisation. His words carried a smirk sharpened by the glance he threw toward Walter. Councilwoman Harris frowned. Elliot, the system's been stable for years. Tonight was unusual. Unusual, Elliot barked a laugh. You call a full alarm during a public meeting? Unusual, I call it dangerous. If we'd had certified contractors, this wouldn't have happened. Walter folded his hands, thumbs pressing together in that quiet, centering habit. He said nothing. Mary Cole from the post office shifted in her chair. He was the only one calm enough to stand still when the alarms hit. That's because he didn't know what was happening, Elliot snapped. Ignorance looks like calm sometimes. The words hung sour. Pastor Leroy spoke from his corner seat, his voice low but steady. Sometimes calm comes from knowing exactly how bad it could get. His eyes lingered on Walter, then moved on as if he had said nothing remarkable. Justice Marker. Jamie, seated on the edge of the room with his backpack, leaned forward. Dad. Maybe we should hear Jamie. Elliot's tone cut sharp. Stay out of council business. A silence stretched. The rain filled it, and from the chapel down the block, a hymn's echo slipped faintly through the vansons, thin but persistent. Councilwoman Harris turned to Walter. Mr. Ash, you've been in the server room tonight. Yes, Walter inclined his head. I observed what Elliot demanded. Walter's voice was low even. Amber lights, checksums drifting, a handshake refusing, machines telling the truth in small ways. Council members exchanged glances. To some it sounded too vague, to others too certain. Elliot leaned forward. You see, this is the language of a janitor dabbling. He should not even be in there. Walter lifted his gaze once steady, then lowered it again. He did not defend himself. Mary whispered silent service, reading what she thought she saw on the patch. But Walter's thumb moved over the faded thread, erasing the glimpse. Silent beat. The council's clerk tapped at a keyboard, trying to bring up the current status. The projector sputtered, then filled the wall with scrolling warnings. Error cascade, estimated time to failure, 0:59:47. The room inhaled at once. Elliot's face drained. What does that mean? It means, Walter said quietly, by midnight, the system will collapse, unless it's guided back. The lights flickered and the hymn's echo from the church swelled faintly, as if to underline his words. The server room felt like a ship's hull under strain metal and code creaking in time with the alarms. Lights pulsed in jagged rhythms and red text cascaded across every screen. The error countdown had dropped to minutes, not hours. In the corner, Walter Ash sat, steady thumb pressed into the frayed patch on his jacket sleeve. At the door, a taller figure entered, Commander Harlan, broad-shouldered in his Navy Reserve coat. His boots marked authority across the linoleum, cutting the storm of panic with the sound of arrival. Behind him trailed Elliot, pale and sweating, clutching a sheaf of useless notes. What's happening here? Harlan's voice filled the space. Elliot jabbed a finger toward Walter. He's tampering with the system. He caused this. Walter didn't move. The screens screamed in crimson fans, whining at fever pitch. Harlan frowned, then caught sight of the patch on Walter's arm. The fabric, once navy blue, carried a stitched motto beneath a name worn to ghosts of thread. He bent closer, reading the faded letters aloud. Silent service. The room hushed. Even the alarms seemed to hesitate. Mary Cole, standing near the wall, whispered the words after him as though repeating scripture. Walter's eyes stayed level. He did not confirm nor deny. Harlan straightened. This patch isn't decoration. It's proof of service. He looked at the council, then at Elliot. Do you know what these words mean? They don't belong to janitors. They belong to the men who guarded oceans without ever needing to speak about it. Elliot blustered. That's romantic nonsense. We need an actual reset key, not folklore. Walter shifted his tablet, connecting the cable once more. The motto is the sequence. His voice was soft, but it carried cutting beneath the noise. Silent service, a protocol written in when others only drafted theory. Recognition unlocks what shouting cannot. Harlan frowned, then leaned down to the console. His voice, clear and firm, repeated the words, silent service. The monitors flickered. The flood of red lines froze, then began to retract as if pulled back by an unseen tide. Fans slowed from their panicked whirl to a measured, calm hum. On the central screen, a pale circle of light spread outward, reclaiming the system's order. The silence afterward was vast, heavier than the alarms had ever been. Elliot staggered a step back, color draining from his face. That's impossible. He's just a janitor. Harlan's gaze fixed on him. The commander's words slammed him with regulation, but the patch freed him. SM lock plus evidence slammed equals weight of regulation, symbolic, not physical. The words cracked Elliot's authority like glass. His shoulders sagged, and for once he had nothing to say. Mary crossed herself quietly. Jamie whispered he knew all along. Walter unplugged the cable, coiled it with slow precision, and set it back in his pocket. His thumb lingered on the patch, steady as the hum that now filled the room. Silent beat. The commander turned to him. Mr. Ash, or should I say, Petty Officer Ash. Whatever your title tonight, you carried this place back from the brink. Walter inclined his head. Systems tell their truth. Someone has to listen. In the hallway outside, the choir rehearsed for the holiday service, their voices drifting in muffled harmony. The notes slipped under the door, weaving with the renewed hum of the servers. It sounded less like machines now and more like breathing. The council chamber behind the glass stood frozen. No one cheered. No one clapped. But every pair of eyes settled on Walter Gray, steady, quiet, like witnesses to something they could not unsee. The crisis had ended not with Elliot's authority or council's debate, but with a man who carried his service in silence, stitched in a patch no one had bothered to read until now. Morning came with the shuffle of envelopes and the squeak of the bulletin board cork. Mary Cole, postmistress, with a sharp eye for order, pinned a fresh printout to the center square. It wasn't a lost dog notice nor a potluck flyer. It was a photograph, Walter Ash's frayed patch motto, clear in its faded gold thread, silent service. Folks waiting in line paused mid-stamp. Conversations faltered. By the time the bell over the post office door rang a third time, half the town was huddled around the board. Is that? Walter's someone asked. Mary nodded. And here's the log he left. She smoothed the paper beside the photo, a single page of notations in Walter's steady hand. No flourish, no explanation. Just system lines recorded sequence by sequence, the way only someone who had been listening for years could have written. Jamie whispered, "It's proof. He knew what he was doing all along." An older farmer squinted at the page. And Elliot mocked him in public, same as he's mocked half this town. The hum of the room shifted from curiosity to outrage. At the counter, Elliot strode in pale from a sleepless night. What's this circus? Mary folded her arms. It's the truth. You people can't take a janitor's scribbles as he's the one who steadied the system, Councilwoman Harris interrupted, stepping forward. And you nearly sank it with your arrogance. The mutter of voices swelled, each sentence turning sharper. We trusted you. He kept quiet because that's who he is. You dismissed him, Elliot. We all heard it. Elliot's lips parted, but no words found him. The patch photo, still and silent, spoke louder than any defense he could offer. Justice Marker. By afternoon, the council gathered again. The town hall air was tense, wood floors creaking under shifting feet. Elliot sat rigid, jaw tight. Mr. Raines Harris announced, effective immediately, your oversight of library systems is suspended. This town cannot entrust authority to pride over competence. Elliot's hands fumbled the papers in front of him. He opened his mouth closed. It lowered his gaze. For the first time, he had no retort. Outside, Walter leaned against the brick wall, coat collar turned against the drizzle. Through the thin walls, he could hear the choir practicing in the church next door. Voices rose, not perfect, but unified, a hymn of gratitude echoing down the street. Silent beat. He listened, thumb brushing once more across the patch on his sleeve, then let his hand fall to his side. The town would carry the story now. Every resident who had paused at that bulletin board, every child who had seen the photo, every council member who had heard the judgment, each became part of the echo. And echoes in small towns have long lives. The December sky hung low, heavy with silver clouds, as townsfolk gathered in the library foyer. The smell of coffee and pine boughs filled the hall. Where once the servers had rattled with panic, a quiet reverence now lingered. A new plaque gleamed on the wall, brass polished bright in honor of Walter Ashe. Silent service beneath it, framed behind glass, sat the worn patch. The threads were faded, but the words were clear now. Silent service. Mary Cole read aloud for the small crowd. He steadied what others panicked to fix. He carried competence without asking for applause. Heads nodded, and a hush followed, respectful as a prayer. Jamie stood beside Walter, hands clasped. Sir, are you sure? The boy's voice was low, almost protective, as Walter pressed the patch into his palm. Walter's hand lingered. Some things belong to the next set of hands. But it's yours, Jamie protested. Walter shook his head gently. It was never mine alone. It was a standard. The boy swallowed, then placed the patch back into Walter's palm, only for Walter to walk it forward, sliding it into the frame behind the plaque. The latch clicked, sealing memory into legacy. Councilwoman Harris stepped up, her tone solemn. This town once mistook quiet for weakness. We see better now. Mr. Ashe, you kept us steady. Pastor Leroy added softly. The measure of service is not noise but endurance. His gaze met Walter's with gratitude unspoken. Elliot lingered at the edge, stripped of oversight, unable to lift his chin. The echo of the bulletin board still hung over him, heavier than any reprimand. He left without a word, the crowd's silence louder than accusation. The choir, practicing in the church across the street, began a hymn that spilled into the foyer. Its notes drifted around the plaque, rising like smoke through rafters. Walter exhaled once, steady and slow. Silent beat. That evening, Walter returned home, porch swing creaking beneath his weight. The AM radio hummed an old tune, tinny but warm. He leaned back, coat still, on the echo of the town's voices in his ears. Jamie's words replayed in his mind. It's yours. He had answered truthfully. It was never mine alone. The swing rocked. The house behind him was dark, except for the glow of a kitchen lamp. Somewhere in town a hymn ended, and silence settled like a quilt. Walter whispered the phrase that now belonged to all of them. One steady hand keeps the whole machine honest. The replay line was simple, short and true, just enough to pass from voice to voice, porch to porch, generation to generation. In the library foyer, the brass plaque gleamed, while Mary refilled his cup, a small kindness, as choir rehearsal drifted through the doorway, and he stood with Jamie breathing the warm mix of coffee pine and paper, letting the hush settle like first snow. He had always believed competence is a lamp in a winter window. Quiet light that asks for no applause yet guides you home. Read the patch, remember the man, fix the habit. Behind glass, the worn patch and his simple ledger became the town's proof, the bulletin board note already curling at the corners, and when the AM radio hummed that night on his porch swing, he watched the foyer lights glow across the street and felt the town breathe easier. One steady hand keeps the whole machine honest.